My grandmother's nurse stole her jewelry, and I caught her on a hidden camera. My grandmother's nurse has been stealing from her for 3 weeks, and yesterday I finally proved it. The police arrested her in my grandmother's bedroom while she had a diamond ring in her pocket. But getting to that point nearly destroyed my relationship with my family, cost me thousands of dollars, and made me question whether I was losing my mind. I'm 31 years old, and my grandmother Eleanor has been the most important person in my life since I was 7. That's when my mom died in a car accident and my dad fell apart. He remarried within a year to a woman who made it clear she wasn't interested in raising someone else's kid. I spent every summer, every holiday, and most weekends at my grandmother's house. She taught me to bake, helped me with homework, came to every school play and soccer game. When I graduated college, she was in the front row crying happy tears. She's been my real parent in every way that matters. 3 months ago, my grandmother had a stroke. Not a massive one, but enough to affect her left side mobility and her short-term memory. She's 79 years old, and the doctors said she'd need full-time care, at least temporarily, maybe permanently. The hospital social worker suggested either a nursing facility or in-home care. My grandmother was adamant. She wanted to stay in her house, the house she'd lived in for 52 years. She didn't want to go to some facility where she'd share a room with strangers and eat meals in a cafeteria. I understood completely. That house was filled with memories of my grandfather, who'd passed 12 years ago, of my mother, of her family. Moving her out felt like erasing all of that. So I told her we'd make in-home care work. My dad and his wife Linda offered to help financially, though Linda made several comments about how expensive it would be and maybe we should reconsider the facility option. My grandmother's insurance would cover some of the costs, but not all. We'd need to hire through a licensed home health agency to get any insurance coverage at all. We went with a company called Compassionate Care Home Health. They had good reviews online, were licensed and bonded, and the intake coordinators seemed professional and thorough. They assigned us a nurse named Brenda Sullivan, 52 years old, 15 years of experience in elder care, glowing references. She was available to work 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 10-hour shifts from 8 in the morning until 6 at night. We'd need to hire weekend coverage separately, which my dad, Linda, and I would split. Brenda started on a Monday in late July. I took that day off work to be there, to meet her and make sure my grandmother was comfortable. Brenda seemed nice enough. A little chatty, but friendly. She had photos of her own grandchildren on her phone that she showed us. She asked all the right questions about my grandmother's medications, dietary restrictions, mobility issues. She helped my grandmother to the bathroom with patience and dignity. By the end of that first day, I felt cautiously optimistic. I'm a graphic designer, and I work from home 3 days a week, so I was at my grandmother's house fairly often those first 2 weeks. Brenda seemed to be doing a good job. My grandmother was clean, fed, and medicated on schedule. The house was tidy. Brenda even did light meal prep and laundry without being asked. She chatted with my grandmother about her life, looked at old photo albums with her, seemed genuinely engaged. Then, in the 3rd week, something happened. I came by on a Wednesday afternoon after a client meeting. I'd brought lunch for my grandmother and Brenda. When I arrived, Brenda seemed flustered. She said she'd been looking for my grandmother's reading glasses and couldn't find them anywhere. We searched together for 20 minutes before finding them in the bathroom, which was odd because my grandmother rarely wore her glasses in the bathroom. The next day, Thursday, my grandmother asked me where her blue cardigan was, the one my grandfather had bought her for their 40th anniversary. She always kept it on the back of her bedroom chair. It wasn't there. We looked everywhere. Brenda helped us search, suggesting maybe it had been put in the laundry by mistake. It never turned up. Friday, I noticed my grandmother seemed agitated. She kept saying something was wrong but couldn't articulate what. Her short-term memory issues made it hard for her to explain. She kept looking around her bedroom like she was searching for something. When I asked her what she needed, she just shook her head and said she didn't know. Something wasn't right. That weekend, I stayed at her house both days. Saturday morning, my grandmother asked me to get something from her jewelry box. She wanted to wear the pearl earrings my grandfather had given her on their 25th anniversary. I opened the jewelry box on her dresser, the same wooden box that had been there my entire life, and immediately something felt off. The box seemed less full than I remembered. I started going through it carefully. My grandmother had never been wealthy, but she had accumulated some nice pieces over the years. Her engagement ring, several pairs of earrings, a few bracelets, some costume jewelry mixed in with the real stuff. I asked her about specific pieces. Where was the garnet bracelet? She said it should be in the box. Where was the gold chain with the heart pendant? Should be in the box. Where was my mother's wedding ring? The one my grandmother had kept after my mom died, planning to give it to me someday. My grandmother's face went pale. She said, "Get the box. Look in the bottom compartment." There was a small drawer at the bottom of the jewelry box where my grandmother kept her most valuable pieces. My mother's wedding ring, her own wedding ring since her fingers had gotten too swollen to wear it, a diamond tennis bracelet, a pair of ruby earrings. I pulled open the drawer. It was empty. My grandmother started crying, not the gentle tears of an old woman, but deep, body-shaking sobs. Those pieces weren't just valuable, they were irreplaceable. My mother's wedding ring especially. It was the only piece of jewelry I'd ever inherit that had been my mom's. My grandmother kept apologizing. She said she should have put everything in a safe deposit box. She should have been more careful. I called my dad immediately. He came over with Linda. We tore apart my grandmother's bedroom looking for the jewelry. Nothing. Linda suggested that maybe my grandmother had moved him and forgotten. Her memory wasn't reliable anymore. Maybe she'd put them somewhere safe and couldn't remember where. My grandmother insisted she hadn't touched that jewelry box in months except to look at the pieces occasionally. I asked about Brenda. Had she been in the bedroom unsupervised? My dad said, of course she had. She worked there alone 5 days a week. She had to help my grandmother dress, bathe, use the bathroom. She had complete access to the house. But he said we shouldn't jump to conclusions. Brenda had been vetted by the agency. She had references and a clean background check. Linda was more direct. She said accusing someone of theft is serious and we need proof. If we made accusations without evidence, we could be sued for defamation. The agency could drop us as clients. We'd have to start over finding care for my grandmother, which could take weeks. Do I really want to risk that based on missing jewelry that could just be misplaced? I didn't have a good answer. My grandmother's memory was unreliable. Things had been going missing, but nothing we could definitively prove had been stolen versus lost. The jewelry was valuable, but I couldn't prove it had been in that drawer recently. What if Linda was right? What if my grandmother had moved it months ago and forgotten it? But looking at my grandmother's face, seeing her distress, I knew in my gut something was wrong. I told my dad I wanted to install a camera in my grandmother's bedroom, just to monitor things, to make sure nothing else went missing. He immediately said no. It would be an invasion of Brenda's privacy. If she found out, she could quit. Worse, if we were recording her without consent, that could be illegal depending on state laws. I researched it that night. In our state, you're allowed to record in your own home without consent as long as it's not in spaces where someone would have a reasonable expectation of privacy, like a bathroom. A bedroom was a gray area, but since my grandmother lived there and consented to the camera, it should be legal. My dad still didn't like it. He said it felt wrong, like we were treating Brenda like a criminal before we had any proof. We compromised. We'd install a visible security camera in the living room, tell Brenda it was for my grandmother's safety in case she fell when alone. See if that deterred any further theft. If nothing else went missing, then maybe the jewelry really had just been misplaced. If things continued to disappear even with the visible camera present, then we'd know something else was going on. The camera was installed on Monday. I told Brenda it was a safety measure so we could check on my grandmother remotely. Brenda said that was smart, and she wished more families did that. She seemed completely unbothered by it. That week, nothing went missing. My dad said, see, maybe the jewelry issue had been a misunderstanding. Maybe having the camera made everyone more aware and careful. But then the following Monday, week 5 of Brenda's employment, my grandmother called me at work. She was whispering, which was strange. She said her small television was gone, the 15-inch TV that sat on her bedroom dresser. She watched the morning news on it every day. It was gone, and Brenda had told her that my dad must have taken it for repair without mentioning it. I called my dad. He hadn't touched the TV. I checked the living room camera footage remotely from my phone. You couldn't see into my grandmother's bedroom from that angle, but you could see the front door. I scrolled through the footage from that morning. At 10:15, Brenda had carried something rectangular wrapped in a blanket out to her car. She'd returned 5 minutes later without it.
I felt sick. I called my dad back and told him what I had seen. He said the rectangular object could have been anything. Maybe she was taking laundry to her car. Maybe it was her lunch bag. I said, laundry isn't rectangular and rigid like a TV. He said we still didn't have definitive proof.
I left work early and drove to my grandmother's house. When I arrived, Brenda was in the kitchen making lunch. I asked her directly about the TV. She looked surprised and said she'd noticed it was missing that morning. She assumed my dad had taken it. I asked why she'd carried something wrapped in a blanket to her car that morning. Her face changed, became guarded. She said she hadn't carried anything to her car. I was mistaken. I told her I had camera footage. She said the camera was in the living room. It couldn't see what she carried. She'd taken her gym bag to her car, that's all. I asked to see her gym bag. She said it was personal property and she didn't appreciate being interrogated. Then she said maybe this arrangement wasn't working out. If I didn't trust her, perhaps she should request a different assignment from the agency. I panicked. Despite everything, we needed care for my grandmother. It was already Thursday afternoon. If Brenda quit, we'd have no coverage starting tomorrow, and finding replacement care could take days or weeks. My dad couldn't take that much time off work. Neither could I. Linda had made it clear she wasn't available for full-time care. I backed down. I apologized for questioning her, said I was just stressed and worried about my grandmother. Brenda accepted my apology but remained cool and professional the rest of the day. That evening, I ordered a hidden camera online, a small device that looked exactly like a digital alarm clock, but had a camera lens hidden in the display. It was motion activated and recorded to an internal SD card. I paid extra for next day shipping. My dad said I was making a huge mistake. If Brenda found it, she'd definitely quit. If she didn't find it and we caught her on camera, we'd have to deal with police and lawyers, and it would be a whole ordeal. Wasn't it better to just let the agency know our concerns and request a different nurse? I said no, because if Brenda was stealing, she'd just do it to her next client. And if she wasn't, then we'd know for sure, and I'd apologize and we could all move forward. But I needed to know the truth. I needed to know if the person we were trusting with my grandmother's care was robbing her. The camera arrived Friday. I went to my grandmother's house that afternoon after Brenda left for the day. I set up the alarm clock camera on my grandmother's dresser, positioned so it faced the jewelry box and would capture anyone approaching the dresser. I showed my grandmother how it worked and told her to act completely normal. She was sharp enough to understand despite her memory issues. She squeezed my hand and said she hoped I was wrong about Brenda, but if I wasn't, she wanted to know. That weekend passed slowly. I checked the camera footage remotely through an app on my phone, just my grandmother moving around her room, me helping her dress, my dad stopping by. Nothing unusual. Monday came and I watched the live feed periodically throughout the day. Brenda arrived at 8, helped my grandmother with breakfast and her morning medications. Around 10, they were in the living room watching TV together. The bedroom was empty and the camera sat silent. At 11:30, Brenda helped my grandmother to the bathroom. Then I saw Brenda enter the bedroom alone. My heart started pounding. She looked toward the door, checking to make sure my grandmother was still in the bathroom. Then she walked directly to the dresser. She opened the jewelry box. The camera captured everything in perfect clarity. Brenda's hands going through the jewelry, pushing aside the costume pieces, looking for anything valuable. She pulled out a gold bracelet, examined it, put it in her uniform pocket. Then she opened the drawer below. It was mostly empty since the best pieces were already gone, but there were a few items my grandmother had moved there from other places. A pair of silver earrings, a small jade pendant. Brenda took both. I was shaking as I watched. She closed the jewelry box, glanced around the room one more time, and left. The whole thing took maybe 90 seconds. I immediately called my dad. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I tried Linda. Voicemail. I sat at my desk at work, staring at my phone, replaying the footage over and over. I had proof. Clear, undeniable proof that Brenda was stealing from my grandmother. I wanted to drive over there immediately and confront her, but what if she destroyed evidence? What if she claimed the camera was illegal and anything recorded couldn't be used against her? I needed to think strategically. I called a lawyer, someone I'd worked with on a contract issue last year, left a message explaining the situation and asking for advice on next steps. Then I called the Compassionate Care Home Health Agency and asked to speak with a supervisor. The receptionist transferred me to a woman named Patricia Vance, who identified herself as the regional director. I explained that I had video evidence of our assigned nurse stealing from my grandmother. Her tone changed immediately from friendly to cautious. She asked what kind of evidence. I said a hidden camera in my grandmother's bedroom had captured the nurse going through the jewelry box and taking items. She looked surprised and said she'd noticed it was missing that morning. She assumed my dad had taken it. Patricia was silent for a moment. Then she said hidden cameras in bedrooms were problematic from a privacy standpoint. I said my grandmother lived in that bedroom and had consented to the camera. She said she'd need to review the footage before taking any action. She couldn't just fire or reassign a nurse based on an accusation. I asked if she was serious. I had video of her employee stealing, and she wanted to review it before doing anything? She said that was correct. Company policy required investigation before disciplinary action. I told her I was also calling the police. She said that was my right, but she strongly suggested I let the agency handle this internally first. Getting police involved could be complicated and might not result in the outcome I wanted. I asked what that meant. She said prosecution of these matters was often difficult, and if we went through official channels, my grandmother might have to testify. Did I really want to put a 79-year-old stroke victim through that stress? I hung up on her. Then I called the non-emergency police number, explained the situation to the dispatcher. She said an officer would be sent to take a report, but I should understand that theft cases involving home healthcare workers were complicated. The burden of proof was high. I said I had video evidence. She said that was good. An officer would be there within 2 hours. I called my dad again. This time he answered. I told him everything. The footage, the phone calls, that police were coming. He was quiet for a long moment, then said he'd meet me at my grandmother's house. He still sounded skeptical, like maybe I was overreacting. That changed when I sent him the video clip. He called back 30 seconds later, furious. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes and Brenda better still be there when he arrived. I drove to my grandmother's house, probably faster than I should have. I arrived at 1:15. Brenda's car was still in the driveway. I let myself in with my key. Brenda was in the kitchen preparing my grandmother's lunch. She looked up when I entered and smiled like nothing was wrong. Asked if I was joining them for lunch today. I said no, I was just there to check on a few things. My hands were shaking. I went to my grandmother's bedroom where she was napping in her chair. I checked the dresser. The jewelry box was exactly as it had been in the video. The bracelet and earrings and pendant were gone. My dad arrived at 1:30. He went straight to the kitchen and asked Brenda to step into the living room. He wanted to talk to her. Brenda looked confused but followed him. I joined them. My dad asked Brenda directly if she had taken anything from my grandmother's bedroom. Brenda's face flushed. She said absolutely not, and she was insulted by the question. My dad said we had video footage. Brenda's expression changed. She said, "What video footage?" My dad pulled out his phone and played the clip. Brenda watched in silence. When it finished, she said that camera was illegal. We couldn't record her without permission. My dad said the camera was in my grandmother's bedroom, in my grandmother's house, and my grandmother had consented. She said she hadn't consented, and this was an invasion of her privacy. She was calling her union representative. My dad said she could call whoever she wanted, but first, she was going to empty her pockets. Brenda refused, said we had no right to search her. My dad said then we'd wait for the police who were already on their way. Brenda's face went very pale. She said this was a misunderstanding. The video wasn't clear. She was organizing the jewelry box, not stealing. My dad asked why organizing required putting items in her pocket. Brenda didn't have an answer. The police arrived at 2 o'clock. 2 officers, one older male and one younger female. They asked us to explain the situation. My dad showed them the video on his phone. The male officer asked Brenda if she'd like to explain herself. Brenda said she wanted to speak to a lawyer. The officer said that was her right, but they'd still need to search her if we're filing a theft report. Did she have any items belonging to the residence on her person? Brenda started crying. Not gentle tears, but loud, dramatic sobs. She said she'd made a mistake. She was under financial stress. Her daughter needed surgery and insurance wasn't covering it all. She'd seen the jewelry and thought just 1 or 2 small pieces wouldn't be missed. She planned to return them. She really did. This was all just a terrible misunderstanding brought on by desperation. The female officer asked if she had the items with her now.
Brenda reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out the gold bracelet, silver earrings, and jade pendant. Set them on the coffee table. The officer asked if there were other items. Brenda said no, just these. My dad asked about my mother's wedding ring, about the diamond tennis bracelet, about the television. Brenda said she didn't know anything about those items.
I showed the officers the footage from the previous week, the blanket-wrapped rectangular object being carried to Brenda's car. The male officer asked Brenda about it. She insisted it was her gym bag. He asked if they could search her vehicle. Brenda said no. He said they could get a warrant. Brenda said fine, get a warrant. She wasn't letting anyone search her car without one. The officers asked if we wanted to press charges. My dad said absolutely. They arrested Brenda, read her rights, and put her in handcuffs. She was crying and begging the whole time, saying she'd lose her nursing license, she'd lose everything. My dad said she should have thought of that before stealing from a vulnerable elderly woman. They took her out to the patrol car. The female officer stayed behind to take our full report and collect the camera as evidence. She said the video was very clear and would definitely help the case. She asked if we had documentation of the other missing items. I described everything I could remember from my grandmother's jewelry box. My mother's wedding ring in detail, the inscription inside, the tiny chip in one of the diamonds. The officer wrote it all down. She said they'd search Brenda's home and vehicle with a warrant. If the items were there, they'd be recovered. After the police left, my dad and I sat with my grandmother and explained what had happened. She cried, but this time from relief. She'd been right that something was wrong. She hadn't been confused or forgetful. Someone really had been stealing from her. I held her hand and apologized for not believing her immediately, for questioning whether her memory was reliable. She said it was okay. She understood why we'd been unsure. Patricia Vance from Compassionate Care called an hour later. She'd heard that police had been called and Brenda had been arrested. She wanted to come by to discuss the situation. I said there was nothing to discuss. Their employee had been caught on camera stealing and was now in police custody. Patricia said the agency took these matters very seriously and wanted to review their internal procedures. Could she come by tomorrow morning? She arrived Tuesday at 9 with another woman she introduced as the agency's legal counsel. They asked to see the camera footage. I showed them on my laptop. They watched in silence. Patricia looked genuinely upset. She said Brenda had been with the agency for 3 years and had never had a complaint before. This was shocking and disturbing. Their lawyer asked about the camera's placement and my grandmother's consent, clearly looking for any angle to claim the footage wasn't valid. I showed them the signed consent form my lawyer had helped me draft the day before, backdated to when the camera was installed. Patricia said the agency would be conducting a full investigation. Brenda's employment was terminated immediately. They'd review all her previous client assignments to see if there were any other concerns. She asked if we needed replacement care. I said we'd be finding that elsewhere. She understood. Then she asked if we planned to sue the agency. Her lawyer jumped in before I could answer, saying the agency had followed all proper vetting procedures and couldn't be held responsible for an employee's criminal actions. My lawyer, who joined us for this meeting, disagreed. He said the agency had been notified of theft concerns and had discouraged us from contacting police. They'd prioritized their employees' privacy over their clients' safety. That could constitute negligence. Patricia's lawyer said we'd be hearing from their insurance company. My lawyer said that was fine. We looked forward to it. They left after 40 minutes of tense conversation. My lawyer said we had a strong case for a civil lawsuit, but it would take time and energy. Did we want to pursue it? I looked at my dad. He looked at my grandmother. She said she just wanted her jewelry back. Everything else was secondary. The police called Wednesday afternoon. They'd executed the search warrant on Brenda's home and vehicle. They'd found the television in her garage, still with my grandmother's room label on the back. They'd found the blue cardigan in a donation bag in Brenda's closet. And they'd found a small fireproof safe under Brenda's bed containing multiple pieces of jewelry, including my mother's wedding ring. I cried when they told me, real shoulder-shaking sobs of relief. My mother's ring was recoverable.
The detective said we could come to the station to identify and claim the items once they'd been photographed and documented as evidence. It might take a few days. That was fine. I'd wait as long as necessary. Thursday, I went to the station with my dad. They laid out everything they'd recovered on a table: the television, the cardigan, the jewelry. My mother's wedding ring looked exactly as I remembered it. Simple gold band with 3 small diamonds. The inscription inside, "Forever, James," in my father's handwriting. My grandmother's diamond tennis bracelet, the ruby earrings, the garnet bracelet, everything that had been in that bottom drawer, plus several other pieces I hadn't even realized were missing. The detective said there was other jewelry in the safe that didn't match our description, likely stolen from other clients. They're contacting Compassionate Care for a list of Brenda's previous assignments to reach out to those families. My dad asked how long Brenda had been doing this. The detective said based on the variety of items, probably months or years. She'd been careful, taking small amounts from each client, probably betting that elderly people with memory issues wouldn't notice or would be blamed for losing things themselves. It was calculated and predatory. She specifically targeted the most vulnerable people, those who couldn't reliably report theft, whose families would doubt them. I felt sick thinking about how many other families had gone through what we had, how many elderly people had been told they were confused or forgetful when they insisted something was missing. Brenda counted on that. She counted on the vulnerability and dismissed voices of old people. The detective told me that elder financial abuse is massively underreported. Caregivers, family members, and strangers all take advantage of elderly people who can't fight back or whose complaints aren't taken seriously. He said I did the right thing by trusting my instinct and investigating. A lot of people don't. My dad apologized to both me and my grandmother for not taking the concern seriously enough at first. He said he'd been so worried about maintaining care coverage that he hadn't properly considered that the caregiver herself might be the threat. Linda, surprisingly, also apologized. She said she'd been wrong to suggest we shouldn't investigate, that protecting the care arrangement wasn't worth ignoring theft. The whole experience taught me several things. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Believe elderly people when they report problems, even if their memory isn't perfect. Document everything. And don't let fear of consequences stop you from pursuing the truth. Yes, confronting Brenda disrupted my grandmother's care and created stress and required police involvement, but it also stopped a predator and recovered irreplaceable items. My mother's wedding ring is now in my possession. My grandmother gave it to me last month, said she wanted me to have it while she's still here to see me wear it. I had it resized and I wear it every day. Every time I look at it, I think about how close I came to losing it forever, how it could have been sold to some pawn shop or melted down, but instead it's here, on my finger, connecting me to my mother and grandmother across time. That's worth every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, every uncomfortable confrontation. Some things are worth fighting for, and my grandmother, her dignity, her belongings, and her peace of mind were definitely worth fighting for.